Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dog Walk, the almost daily show where I take my dogs out to, while discussing whatever has been on my mind that day. Maybe sometimes talk a little bit more about myself in an uncut, unedited, one take fashion and or because I tend to always ramble on a little bit more than I expected or intended. If I'm lucky, I get to actually say 50% of what I wanted to say, maybe 25% of the time. So, with that out of the way, as I mentioned yesterday, today I'm gonna start discussing or the first episode, I guess, in a sort of series of related topics that I want to broach, at least for my initial attack, because I've got a feeling that I will be discussing these topics at length in multiple future episodes, actually. But I want to discuss all of these three things in a. Sorry, there's a car coming. And oh, never mind. Daisy's small and it's dark, so I need to make sure that she's really out of the way because I can never assume that the driver will see her. So, yeah, the three things that I want to talk about, I think, really are very interrelated. And I do apologize if I start to meander into from one topic to the next, but I will try to keep it as separate as possible. That being said, as I mentioned, I know that I will have to discuss these topics more in depth at a later date. So, first of these topics being time and how we live in a four-dimensional world, which it seems like people don't realize or don't act as such. Then I also want to talk about potential better political systems or better organizations, a way to reform our political systems, and finally, what a future economy would look like in my perfect world. So, but before I get into that, I had the thought a little bit earlier this morning that to finish off or to illustrate the what I was saying yesterday related to Loki and timelines and multiverse, etc. The best or the shortest way and simplest way to illustrate what I was trying to say is that in my mind, what we see in Loki, all the timelines that come along and that create these variants are basically just new branches that grow off of Yggdrasil, right? And it is actually a scaling problem, despite what He Who Remains says, because of exponential growth. I will discuss that probably in another episode. I've talked about it a little bit before, but basically, if ever you have any number that is bigger than 1, even if it's infinitesimally bigger than 1, that number, as soon you put it on the exponential, right? Because a timeline splits into 2, then 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, etc. Point is that if ever you've got a number that's not 1, the scaling will tend towards infinity and therefore will not be controllable. The only way to keep everything at a manageable time loop like He Who Remains had is to keep one timeline. Anyway, one branch to the tree. But what I actually wanted to say, again, see a divergence or a little detour that I wasn't planning on saying. Really, all I wanted to mention was, in my mind, all the timelines that we see in Loki, they're just... Whoa, Daisy, you okay? They're just branches off of one Yggdrasil. They're not parallel universes. They're just another branch from the same universe, a different timeline from the same universe. Whereas in my mind, a multiversal war would involve multiple Yggdrasils. An incursion would be an Yggdrasil crashing into another Yggdrasil, not one branch from the tree touching another branch from that same tree. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Anyway, I don't want to talk about it more because I want to get to the main topic today, and it's a bit cold, so I'm also not going to say a lot more about myself on today's episode, because if I do, I won't actually get to even begin to talk about what I wanted to talk about today. So, yeah, what do I mean by we live in a four-dimensional world and people need to start acting like it? I'll start with, I guess, a question to you. What do you think is better, on average, to be you or to be a king or nobility? I'm guessing that most of you are going to say, well, I'd rather be a king or a queen, right? Than myself, because, I'm just a random person and blah, blah, blah. I'm not rich and all that stuff, right? I've got debt and, whereas kings have tons of money and all of that. Well, what if I told you that I think you're wrong? Because you're projecting, remember I said like statistically and on average, right? So you're projecting your perception of what a noble or a king or a queen is, which is probably something like, the English, the British monarchs, right? Like Queen Elizabeth or those other royalties from the Netherlands or things like that. Or you might be thinking, hey, like Louis the Sun King in France, or these big opulent parties and all that stuff. And wow, that sounds amazing. That sounds much better than what I have, right? But in reality, those are just a few examples of nobility, and a few very recent and contemporary ones at that. The average monarch, and monarch, hopefully you know what that means, or the average king, did not have access to all of these resources. The average king probably lived way before then, right? We're talking, let's say, medieval era or even BC times. I think about a king, or, yeah, let's say it this way. There were a lot more kings in the BC times than there are today, right? So statistically speaking, if you were the average king, you're probably living, let's say 1,000 years ago. Now, don't quote me on that number. I'm just trying to, illustrate a point, give me a little bit of latitude here. And 1,000 years ago, did they have internet? Did they have electricity? Did they have access to hot running water the moment that they turned the tap? Did they have access to eating kiwis in Canada? Did they have access to, I think you get where I'm going with this. And sorry, Daisy did some business. I need to pause, and I will be right back. Okay, we are back. So, as I was saying, food, hot water, it goes also much further than that, right? Think about medicine, right? Why were so many kings so young? Because life expectancy was like 30 years back then, right? So, think about, hygiene, all of that stuff. Just heating your home in winter, or if you live in the south, AC in summer. All of that stuff, the ability to travel more than a few miles every day. All of that, right? Like, how many kings in 1,000 years ago do you think would have the chance to pay a few $100, let's say, or the equivalent of a few hours or days of work, and with that earning time or potential, be able to finance travel for to 1,000 miles away on an airplane in a day, right? Like, that's just, you would say that to a king and he would think you are mad and that it's pure fantasy. So I'm sorry to say, but when you look at it and from a four-dimensional perspective, when you include the aspect of time, maybe you can start to realize what I'm trying to say, that a few hundred years ago, even kings and queens didn't have as good of a lifestyle and opportunities as you do today, as a random nobody, quote unquote, right? So think about that a little bit, and what does that mean to how you should, or how does that affect how you should see the world? I think it's really eye-opening, and it's something that should make you consider your goals and your opinions. I'll say it like that. Obviously, I need to elaborate a little bit more. So it's undeniable that, I'll say, technology, I think, is the main driver. I've seen arguments like the exact argument that I am making right now, I've seen in support of capitalism as an economic system and or democracy as a political system, to kind of start to link the three topics together. But I think that the true driver, oh sorry, now it's Mistra's business turn, so before I get into this point, I will pause here and I will resume. Actually, yeah, I'll consider this the intro to the time talk, and I will resume in the next half of the episode. Thank you for being patient.